Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this presentation. My name is Forr. I'm going to take you through a look at Ireland in 2021. I'm not coming at things from a quote-unquote left-wing or quote-unquote right-wing perspective. I'm simply looking at things from an ordinary Irish person's perspective, and that's how I'd like you to take this information as well. Consider for yourself. Don't let other people tell you how to think. Look at the information presented here and come to your own conclusions. So, the Irish people, the Irish and nationalism. So most Irish people, when they're polled, they tend to say they would like a united Ireland. But do they care about the make-up of that island? In other words, do they want an Irish Ireland, a predominantly Irish Ireland, or do they want an increasingly multicultural Ireland? That's the question. And, do people care? Do people care about the state or the demographic look of Ireland in the future, if you like? And if they don't care, why don't they care? Well, here are some of the reasons why they might not care about what Ireland looks like, what a united Ireland might look like in the future. A lot of people are busy. A lot of people are very busy. They got family. They got jobs. They got demands on their time. They're tired. All right? We've only got so much energy. We've only got so much motivation to look outside the mainstream of information that we see on the standard news media, we've only got so much time. We might not have time to look at a 2-hour stream. We might not have time to even look at a half-hour presentation like this one. Perhaps all we've got time for is some funny clips on YouTube and RTE and Newstalk and whatever, and we don't really want or are too bothered to look beyond that. So that comes about from a certain state of apathy and comfort, okay, which is a result of our materialist modern day living. It's nobody's fault. It's just where we've arrived at in 2021. And also this sense of tolerance, okay? And this sense of tolerance means we don't judge other people. We don't tend to identify too strongly along tribal lines, okay? Even though quite a few other cultures do, but us Europeans and Irish people, that's not really our tendency. So we're not particularly racially conscious. Now, we are somewhat ethnically conscious, as Irish people, but we're not racially conscious, Now, sometimes we're called white, but Irish people don't really think of themselves strongly as white. We think of ourselves as Irish. But we have other groups, like black people, for instance, who identify very strongly along racial lines, okay? And in a sense, that gives them an advantage, when black people move en masse, or even not en masse, but even in certain numbers into other countries, they have this racial solidarity, which gives them a certain advantage over the domestic population, the host population of the country they've moved into. But for Irish people and for a lot of Europeans and people of European heritage, to identify strongly on racial lines is kind of considered a bit crass, and we don't like to talk about it too much. Now, other factors is, you could say we have a certain amount of information overload. Okay, there's a lot of the social media, there's sport, there's fashion, there's soaps, there's a lot of things that sort of take our minds off the bigger picture, if you like, There's the bread and circuses, and this really prevents us from seeing what's really going on, if you like, seeing what's going on behind the curtain. And as well as that, in 2021, we've become more urban, we've become more diverse and less Irish. We've become more atomized. We're less religious overall, and we're a more consumerist society than we were back, even 10, 20 years ago. So as a result, we're less connected to our heritage, less connected to where we come from, our ancestral roots in this country. And our tendency as well is to look at the micro, not the macro, and to look at anecdotal experiences. In other words, rather than looking at the topic of immigration in the whole, in the round, so to speak, what we'll do is we'll look at people around us who are not Irish. Okay, we look at neighbours, we look at work colleagues, we look at people who work in shops and cafes and restaurants and taxis and that sort of thing. And most of those people, as most of Irish people, are generally nice. So we will take our experiences from the micro, from the nearby, from those anecdotal experiences. And because most of the, say, foreign people we know around us are nice, we will tend to conclude, okay, then immigration is not a problem because the foreigners I know are nice. Now that's not a very intelligent way of looking at things, but that's human nature. What we need to do instead is zoom out. And yes, while we look at people as individuals and treat them as individuals, we also need to be able to look at bigger movements generally, okay, and bigger industries. So industries like the mass immigration industry, the human rights industry, the diversity industry, the LGBT industry, the asylum industry, these are all, they're all industries. These are all money-making enterprises in a sense, and these are all operated for profit and generally not for the good of the ordinary people, but for the good of a certain amount of wealthy people at the top and certain vested interests. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, us Irish people as well, we have this trust in authority, trust in the system, okay, trust in authority figures, trust in politicians, trust in, you could say, in religious figures, trust in teachers, trust in solicitors, trust in economists, trust in journalists, and so on. Again, this is human nature. But the problem about this is you have to then be sure that these people are trustworthy. And as time goes on, it's becoming more and more apparent that some of these people in positions of authority are not actually so trustworthy. And that's a bit of a problem. Now, there's another thing I've mentioned here is economic rationalism. Keith Woods has talked about this. David McWilliams has alluded to it in some of his videos. It's something I will talk about, I think, in a future video. I don't really have the time or scope for it right here now. So moving on to the next slide. So to build on this further, what's holding us back? So in 2021 and for most of last year, of course, Ireland is enthralled to not so much the CV itself, but the CV narrative and everything that's going on around it. Okay, so all of these strict measures, the lockdowns, the masks, the social distancing, the fact that you can't meet up with your loved ones, you can't hug them, you can't kiss them, you can't shake hands. On occasion we haven't been able to go to funerals, we haven't been able to see our elderly relatives in nursing homes, things like this. This has a terrible impact on people. And of course there's others, people suffering because they haven't had their scans for illnesses, people suffering from depression. Suicide, of course, is becoming an issue as well. So this is a big problem for us. We've got economic devastation, of course. We've got the small and medium business sector. It's been absolutely pulverized. And even before that, we've had years of social engineering, which has, gradually demoralized us over the years. We have a certain amount of money pouring into Ireland from these big global foundations like the Open Society and many others, and they are changing the social landscape, the cultural landscape. But because it's done gradually, what we have is what's called a boiling frog effect. So it means that we don't necessarily notice these changes happening. Whilst if the changes were to happen suddenly, we would be much more aware of them. But this is the thing, if people want to change society, and if they're sneaky, they'll do it bit by bit, gradually. The boiling frog effect, so that people don't notice their society is being changed radically because it's been done slowly, step by step, or people don't tend to notice it so much. Okay, other factors. The Irish people tend to have this kind of insecurity in our psyche. And this comes from our history, really. We've always had a ruler, we've always had a master, really, in recent centuries anyway. Of course, the British establishment were ruling over us for many centuries, up until you could say about a century ago. And then essentially the church took over for a number of decades. And then in the last few decades, you could say the EU, the UN, the European Central Bank, the IMF, these big ruling global authorities have kind of taken over. And, they essentially dictate to us what we should do, what our politicians should do in order to look after the country. So it's not exactly a very good, not a very healthy situation. We don't have much autonomy. We're always looking for that higher master to tell us what to do. And we have as well, of course, this poor creator instinct. Now, if you're foreign, you won't know what this means. Creator comes from the Irish word creator, which is like a creature. So the poor creature, essentially, poor creator. And this comes from the Irish instinct of looking out for those that are worse off than you. Looking out for people that are poor, people that don't have much, underprivileged people. Because the Irish, for generations, were very, very poor, and it's really only the last few decades that we've got any kind of money together at all, you could say. So for a long time, we really had this instinct of looking out for poor people, for people that don't have much. And we still have it to a large extent. And this, unfortunately, this poor creator instinct has been exploited. It's been exploited by NGOs, it's been exploited by the media, it's been exploited by our politicians. So what we have is this collective of NGOs. I call it the NGO Medusa, or the NGO industrial complex, if you like. We have more NGOs, I think, per head of population than I think than any country in the world. So it's really become a very lucrative industry. And what these organizations have done, now not all of them, don't get me wrong, there's some great NGOs out there, but there are other ones that really are very, very manipulative and that weaponize Irish people's empathy against ourselves. And one of the things they do is they use these kind of power words. One of them is progress, okay, in inverted commas. And certain power words like progress are used to kind of bulldoze through radical changes in Irish society and to prevent ordinary people from being allowed to speak their opinion. So you could say the eye of Sauron, if you like, the big one, the top NGO, the most influential NGO in Ireland is INAR, the Irish Network Against Racism, and they come from ENAR, the European Network Against Racism. And this is an exceptionally wealthy, exceptionally powerful, well-funded NGO in Ireland, and they really are the top one. They sort of determine what goes on in terms of NGOs in Ireland, and they have used this ideology of anti-racism, okay, anti-racism in inverted commas, because it's not really against racism as such. It's using the ideology, it's using the emotional impact of racism to really undermine other races and other groups of people, and in this case, Irish people. And this is what INAR do, and some of these other NGOs as well. They use this kind of made-up ideology of so-called anti-racism to really destabilize and undermine and kind of attack Irish people, essentially. So why are they doing this? Well, INAR and some of these other diversity and inclusion NGOs, they really act as gatekeepers for the wealthy, gatekeepers for the powerful, and they ensure that the rich stay rich. So they are there essentially to enforce the status quo, to make sure that the wealthy stay wealthy. They're enriching the 5%, the top 5%. So I mentioned before, they use these special power words to silence people, to silence the public, often to silence the working class, ordinary Irish people who don't have very much, people who've struggled all their lives, and yet you have these immensely powerful groups like INAR who come in and really stamp all over them and intimidate them and prevent ordinary Irish people from having their say. And one of the ways to do this is through the anti-racism pledge. Well, first of all, they use these special power words to silence the public, like threatening to call people racist or fascist or white supremacist or sexist or whatever, homophobic, etc. These are power words designed to prevent people from expressing their opinion, And INAR also are involved in silencing politicians. They don't just silence ordinary people, they also silence politicians through this so-called anti-racism pledge, okay? And this anti-racism pledge is there to put a muzzle on politicians to prevent them speaking about immigration. And then because politicians can no longer speak about immigration, then the topic of immigration is no longer in the public eye. And what tends to happen then is ordinary people forget about immigration as an issue, even though immigration is a huge issue. It has massive impacts on, particularly on the poorest in society, particularly on the working class, impacts on wage levels, impacts on working conditions, impacts on rents, impacts on house prices, impacts on our environment, impacts on social cohesion, sometimes impacts on crime levels, impacts on public services. impacts on our natural resources. There's so much ways in which immigration impacts on our you know on our society, and yet we are not allowed to speak about it. Our politicians even are not allowed to speak about it because of this so-called anti-racism pledge that INAR have coerced the politicians into signing. So the effect of this is, mission accomplished. The rich win, and you, the ordinary people, lose because you are not allowed to express your opinion on the negative impacts of immigration. And that's not to say that all of the impacts of immigration are negative. Of course, there's some positive impacts too, but the negative side of it, that simply cannot be spoken about. And this is why INAR are there, and this is the damage to groups like INAR do. They prevent people from having a voice, and they even prevent politicians from having a voice. So you can see what we have here is diversity itself is an industry. It is an incredibly lucrative industry. It impacts on everyone. Okay, it impacts on the wealthy in the sense that they make money out of it. It impacts on the NGOs, and they also make money out of it too. And it is in the interests of groups like INAR and some of these other diversity and equality NGOs to pretend that there is more racism out there than there actually is. Okay, because that gives them more reason to be there. This is what's going on. So this is part of the reason why the likes of INAR will exaggerate the problem of racism, and they would pretend that the Irish people have suddenly become racist overnight in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter protests last year, when there was a slew of racism articles out of nowhere, and a lot of this came from INAR, a lot of this came from these NGOs, these diversity and equality NGOs, who really conjured up all of these supposed racist incidents out of nowhere in order to gaslight the public into thinking that the Irish people had all of a sudden become these giant racists. So, a load of nonsense really, but unfortunately a lot of people swallowed it. So here we have the INAR Medusa. So this is what we're dealing with, folks. We have so many of these diversity and equality NGOs, and like I said, there are very good people. There are some very good people working for these organisations. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everyone involved in this is bad. Of course not. There's a lot of good people working in these NGOs, but there's also people who are manipulative, and people who are working against the Irish people, and people who are doing this really to get power and status and money, and don't care about this country, don't care about Irish people, and are there purely to enrich the wealthy. Okay. Now, an example of that would be Lucy. I'll come back to that. Sorry, Lucy Michaels. Okay. Lucy Michaels would be one of these top activists, who work at the top of INAR and Fingal Communities Against Racism, and she's one of the main people involved in part of this so-called anti-racism narrative, helping to silence Irish people and ensuring the wealthy stay wealthy and ensuring Irish people feel bad about themselves. Now, sorry, I moved on there a little bit quickly, but what I wanted to show you here is INAR. Okay, INAR, you could say, a good analogy here is the movie The Terminator. Okay, think of INAR as the Terminator, all right, and the Irish people, Sarah Connor. Okay, and Sarah Connor needs to be protected. Okay, and that's why we have John Connor, or not John Connor, sorry, it's Reese. This is Reese. Reese is the father of John Connor, and Reese is here to protect Sarah Connor. So you can think of that as we are the nationalists. We are Reese here. Okay, the nationalists are here to protect Sarah Connor. So the nationalists are here to protect Ireland. All right. So that's what we are doing here. We are trying to protect Irish people, trying to protect Irish society, Irish culture from the incursions of these subversive NGOs in some cases, the likes of INAR and one similar to that. And these subversive NGOs could be compared to the likes of the Terminator in a sense. The Terminator and his army of killer robots here. And a lot of these people don't care about Ireland. They don't care about what becomes of Ireland, and they are doing immense damage to the social fabric of Ireland and to Irish people. So it's something we need to keep in mind, And that link there, you can have a look at that in your own time. It comes from the movie Terminator, and it's basically where you've got Reese in the car with Sarah Connor, and he's talking about the Terminator will not stop ever, until you are dead. So this for me is a good analogy here. That INAR will not stop ever until Ireland is dead. So yeah, I mean it's I might laugh at it now, but it's not a very nice thought. We have these NGOs who are essentially, in many cases, working against Ireland. And I think that video clip, you can take a look at it in your own time, describes very well the kind of impact that the likes of INAR and similar NGOs are having on Irish society. Now, I mentioned previously something called the system. Now, moving on from that again, we have what I would call the castle. Okay, the castle. The castle is same kind of idea as the system. The castle, the system, the cathedral. What is it? What is it? Okay, essentially it's a collective of these powerful actors. It's the media, okay, it's the news media, it's these various activist NGO groups like INAR and like NASC, like the Irish Refugee Council. There's many more as well. You've got these various academics, okay, in universities. You've got corporations, you've got politicians, you've got various entertainers, and sometimes you've got economists and various other kind of people in the public eye. And these people collectively act as gatekeepers, essentially, And what they do is they work together to control the information that we see. They control the message, So essentially they're shaping our views, and they will select the information that we see. Okay, so this is an incredibly powerful place to be. And not only that, but they control the medium. Okay, they control all of the means by which we access the information. Okay, so they control RTE, they control Newstalk, they control Today FM, they control most of the regional news stations, radio stations in Ireland. The corporations, they control, they are the information flow. They control the information flow. So the likes of Google, Facebook, YouTube, they are controlling what we see. They are determining the message for us. When you type a query into Google, it will direct you towards certain answers. Okay, it's not going to give you the objective answers, the objective information. It will direct you towards certain answers that they want you to see. And the same thing with Wikipedia. Okay, this is what's going on. So just be aware of that. These big search engines, and even the likes of these money businesses, if you like, the likes of Visa, PayPal, Revolut, these are all part of this whole system as well, and they all have the same kind of globalist values, these sort of ultra progressive values, and these are the kind of values that will be sort of perpetuated down to us through the system, which I call the castle, or this, some people call it the cathedral. But like I said, it is a collective of organs that control the information and determine what we see, and in that way control our opinions. So they're determining the right opinions for us. Essentially, they're determining our reality, because the information you see, that becomes your reality. And it doesn't matter if that information is correct, because what you see becomes your reality. And this is the dangerous thing in a way. If you have these powerful actors who don't necessarily have your best interests at heart, they can determine what information you see, and therefore they can determine your reality. And this could be full of false information, and you might not even be aware of it. And this is what's going on. I mean, you could take that a step further in terms of the official version of history. We don't know that this is exactly how things happened. There's a lot of things along the way which when you look into it, you realize are not exactly what we've been told. Now, I can't talk too much about that here, but certain historical events along the lines, in terms of the various world wars, for instance, certain things we're told there are simply not true, or the numbers have been manipulated, or certain events have been completely fabricated, and it's something I'd encourage you to look into in your own time. So we have these gatekeepers as well, often on social media. Okay, in Ireland we'd have the likes of Blind Boy, we'd have a lot of these journalists, we'd have these activists as well. You've got Eben Joseph, you've got Circa Pollock, you've the likes of Saoirse McHugh. You have, in terms of activists, you've got the likes of Lucy Michaels, people like that who reinforce the message. They ensure the status quo stays in power. They help to keep the wealthy and help to keep everyone else in their place. All right. So many of these gatekeepers, they reinforce the message. They're doing the work of the powerful, essentially, ensuring this neoliberal system remains in place. And these people will manipulate us through language: love, hate, progress, solidarity, and through these other power words like racism, fascism, white supremacy, neo-Nazi, etc. Now, there's a very interesting, process, I guess, or technique or something like this called feedback loops. And this explains why we tend to see this, certain information gets reinforced and gets kind of reflected back to us and gets repeated. And that happens through a process called feedback loops. And it's something that if you want to find out more about, Keith Woods has done some great work on this. So I'll refer in the description after this video, I'll refer you to the link for that video and some of the other links that I'll talk about here. So moving on. How the system works. Okay, so this is just a pictorial representation of how public support for radical changes in society are manufactured. So politicians propose radical changes that the public never asked for. NGOs welcome these new proposals, and then the media claims that these proposals have widespread public support. All right, now this is, okay, maybe it's a bit of a simplification, but I think it's a pretty good analogy of how these radical changes come about in society, often without any real support from the public, So it's done by sleight of hand, it's done by smoke and mirrors. And you have this collective of politicians, of NGOs, of media, who will work together, work hand in hand to ensure that the ordinary public don't really get a say in things, but it keeps these vested interests, it keeps them in power, it keeps the wealthy in the kind of lifestyles that they're used to, and it makes sure that, the people are not allowed to have any really say in things. And instead we have these powerful actors like politicians, NGOs and media determining what happens to our society. Okay, cultural colonialism. This is an interesting one. So now in Ireland in recent times we have what can only be called these imported American ideologies like anti-racism, in inverted commas, and critical theory or critical race theory. Now these are really quite dangerous and destructive and divisive ideologies, and they have nothing to do with Ireland, and what they do is they employ this kind of neo-Marxist thinking of oppressor versus oppressed, all right? Very simplistic way of thinking. Now, it's not that kind of duality, that kind of dichotomy, sometimes that can be useful, but if you apply that to every single social issue there is, that just doesn't make sense. It simply doesn't. You can't do that. It's not the kind of it's not the kind of way you should be looking at these issues. Okay, there's much more nuance than that, rather than just saying oppressor versus oppressed. Okay, because then you get into this sort of victim ideology, and you get into thinking, very sort of black and white thinking that, for instance, let's look at black people, for instance. Okay, and then you get black people who will be taught to think that, the oppressor is white people, and white people are the fault of everything bad that ever happened to black people ever. So black people will be the oppressed, white people will be the oppressor. Now that kind of thinking has been perpetuated throughout society, thanks to anti-racism and critical theory. And you can see that's a very simplistic and a very misleading way of looking at the world. But unfortunately, this is the way that a lot of our young people today, particularly, are being taught to think, and it's incredibly dangerous. So, what's happening in Ireland? Well, essentially our history, our culture, our heritage, our identity, all of these are under threat. All of these are going to be made diverse and inclusive, okay? Now, we're not going to be asked about this. This is just going to be forced upon us, okay? So essentially what's going to happen is our history is going to be made, ever more LGBT, ever more diverse. They're going to introduce people of different skin colors and different ethnicities and religions and so on into Irish history, even though we know that that wasn't the case. They're going to introduce gay people and even trans people into our history, and that's not to be against any of those people, but in the same way that I wouldn't want the history and culture and heritage of other countries to be co-opted and really turned into something it's not. In the same way, it shouldn't happen to Ireland either, and that's why I'm concerned about it. So something we need to be very careful of. All of these things we have to protect. We have to have a cultural firewall essentially around our history, our culture, our heritage, our identity, our education as well. That's another one. Our education as well is also under attack. All of these things, our language, our traditions, our built heritage, our flora and fauna, our landscape, our countryside, our people, our Irish people. We need to protect all of these things. They are all under attack. And one of the ways in which they're under attack is we are being racialized in a sense. We're being turned into white, in inverted commas. So some of these people are trying to erase our unique Irish identity, our unique Irish ethnic identity as Irish people. And part of this is in order to include Irish people in the sins of colonialism, of imperialism, of slavery. All right, and the only way they can do that is by calling us white, by removing our unique Irish ethnic identity and instead calling us white. So this is what's going on here. It is to try and guilt us. All right, it's not to try and help us, it's to try and guilt us. So we have to be very careful not to allow that. Okay, anytime anyone starts calling us Irish people white, you push back and you say, no, I'm Irish. Okay, you calling us white, this is imported American ideas. It's nothing got to do with Ireland. Okay, don't start calling me white. I'm Irish. Okay, that's the end of it. Okay, go away with your white. It's got nothing to do with us, right? We are Irish people. Okay, and you continuing to try and call us white or even white Irish, you are trying to co-opt, you're trying to hijack, trying to undermine our unique identity, our unique ethnic identity as Irish people, and we're not going to stand for that. So it's a kind of divide and conquer strategy going on here, us and them. They're trying to instill resentment in other groups and other races and cultures, and they're trying to guilt us Irish people and other Europeans as well. So we can't stand for it. Further references on this would be Long March Through the Institutions, which Gramsci came up with originally, and Yuri Bezmenov talked about this in a famous lecture from the 80s. I link to both of these, to Gramsci's texts and Bezmenov's videos at the end of this video. And you could consider what's going on at the moment a kind of Irish long march through the institutions. And one of these dynamics going on here is what's called bio-Leninism. And this is where various different minority groups, that could be different, immigrant groups, it could be refugees, asylum seekers, it could be Muslims, whatever, it could be LGBT people, etc. They are used collectively to form a kind of cultural battering ram, to kind of break down society, dismantle society. And this kind of thinking came from Saul Alinsky and his rules for radicals. And it's very interesting actually, but very, very destructive, and something we should be aware of. But again, I'll link some references for that in the notes for this video at the end. Okay, so the Forr Royte. What's the Forr Royte? Well, Forr Royte. I'll tell you what the Forr Royte is in a minute. But first of all, let's talk about these Ponzi economies which we have in Europe, in Ireland, in most of the West. And these Ponzi economies, they require constant immigration in order to maximize profits for the wealthy. Okay, so you need a conveyor belt of immigration. You need a constant flow of people coming in. Essentially, you need a reserve army of labor. Now, why do you need this? Well, we, the ordinary people, don't need it. Okay, it's not helping us. It's not good for the ordinary people, but it's great for the leaders of society. It's great for the top 5%. It's great for the wealthy. Okay, so the wealthy get to make more money. That could be rich landlords. That could be the owners of businesses. Okay, that could be people who work in the immigration industry, in the asylum industry. It could be solicitors. It could be retailers. It could be people who work in NGOs. I mean, there's all these various vested interests. It could be politicians, because politicians stand to make more money as well, because you can have more revenue, because more people that come in means more consumption, more spending, means more revenue. So basically, the top few percent of society all stand to benefit from having more people in the country. Okay, so more immigration. More immigration means more people, more spending, more revenue, more profits
for these top few percent of society. So this is why immigration happens, essentially, to maximize profits of the wealthy. Okay, but it's not good for the average person, as we know. So this is coming from this reserve army of labour idea that came from Marx originally, and it's a core tenet of globalism and neoliberalism: undermine the ordinary people and make the wealthy wealthier. Now, nationalism
is an impediment to this process. Nationalism is an impediment to profiteering and exploitation, and this is why it's attacked. Okay, this is why nationalists must be demonized and ostracized, because they are a threat to this neoliberal system, this profiteering system. Okay. Now, you have as well these bourgeois activists and journalists who essentially are part of the system, or at least they help to perpetuate the system. They help to perpetuate the status quo, this neoliberal system. Now, because these activists and journalists are no threat to the system, okay, they'll be left to do whatever they want. But the likes of us, we won't be. Nationalists won't be. Okay, we'll be demonized. And a very instructive term here is far right, and this is why I've called it Forr Royte, because it's often these bourgeois types, oh, the Forr Royte, oh my God, it's the Forr Royte. You're one of those Forr Royte people, aren't you? And this is how you'll find often a lot of these people pronounce far right, because they're often well-to-do people. They're often, pretty wealthy people themselves. These activists and journalist types, So it's often quite privileged people who are criticizing the so-called Forr Royte. And they're looking down their noses essentially at ordinary Irish people. That's what's going on. So it's a kind of classism, and in a way a kind of racism too, because it's Irish people, of course. So it's these kind of often wealthy, kind of well-to-do people looking down their noses at ordinary Irish people. But as part of this Forr Royte in 2021, of course, it's not just us, ordinary Irish people, us nationalists, but it's also, doctors, epidemiologists, virologists, immunologists, and other various health experts. You have some of the more principal solicitors like Una McGurk. You have Marcus de Bruin, of course. You have Ivor Cummins. You have many other people like that who are really trying to get proper information out there. You have Graham Neary as well, of course. You have publicans, publicans who simply want to save their business, save their livelihoods. You have hoteliers now. You've got priests who simply want to, preach to Catholics, who want to actually hold mass again, and are not allowed to do. You've got ordinary SMBs, ordinary small and medium businesses, whose livelihoods are being crushed. And all of this is now apparently Forr Royte. I mean, it's such a nonsense. So what's happening here is the castle, in a sense, the system. The cathedral, okay, this very powerful collective of media, NGOs, politicians, etc. They will circle their wagons and roll out the narrative. We're the good people here, okay? We're the people that want to save, the vulnerable and the elderly and so on. And we're going to take it to these deniers, these CV deniers, these so-called anti-vaxxers, so-called anti-maskers. So again, they're using these power words, okay, to try and demonize ordinary people that simply care about what's coming down the pike, care about what's going to be the future for Ireland. They care about the people whose livelihoods have been crushed. They care about people who aren't getting their scans for cancer and heart disease and so on. They care about people who are confined to their houses, essentially. They care about people who aren't getting to see their relations or their elderly loved ones, or their nieces and nephews and so on, grandchildren. All of this is happening because of these extreme measures, and you have to ask who really are the good people in this situation. Now, I refer you to the Great Barrington Declaration, which is, to my mind, one of the most sensible proposals for how we should go forward as regards to the situation. And I'll leave you to take a look at that link. And you have thousands and thousands of various health experts and a lot of ordinary people as well who have signed that declaration, with certain measures in place, but also with allowing society to get back up and running again. And I think this makes perfect sense. Now, how does this system, this castle I mentioned, how does this system reinforce itself? Well, basically you've got this top-down funding, okay, and this top-down funding is coming from these globalist players, essentially, a lot of these wealthy institutions, whether it be the Open Society, there's many others of these very wealthy, foundations as well, who provide money, and they provide money on a top-down basis, and this money filters down through the EU and down to national level, and it's an incentive for various entertainers and sports people and media people and celebrities and influencers on social media. They're incentivized to become foot soldiers for the system, okay, for this neoliberal system, for this globalist system, which kind of keeps the ordinary people in their place and ensures the wealthy stay wealthy. So we have these foot soldiers, okay, and they're incentivized by the money. Okay, so let's have a think about this. Think about something like the Electric Picnic, all right? Now, if you're a band and you want to play at the Electric Picnic, now there's various sponsors who are part of the Electric Picnic, various kind of drinks companies and, financial companies and so on. And they will all have these very, very, ultra progressive social values and so on, these, incredibly radical progressive values. And in order for a band to get that sponsorship and to be asked to play at the Electric Picnic, for instance, they will have to be seen to be on board with that. Okay, they will have to be seen to be at the same values as the system, okay, as these very powerful global corporations and these kind of big drinks companies and big financial companies and big banks and so on. And so this is part of the reason why we see, a lot of these celebrities and musicians and so on parroting the exact same values as the system, as these corporations, as these incredibly wealthy people, as these big celebrities, they all parrot the exact same values, and these values are not necessarily for the good of society. These values are often kind of socially corrosive, but you'll have the likes of, say, Hosier, and he will be saying exactly the same as what Visa are saying, or exactly the same as what Facebook are saying, and in this way, or as Amazon, and all of these kind of very powerful global corporations and institutions will be saying the same thing as as the likes of Hosier and as the likes of what's her name? I forgot her name now. The Dublin singer, the one, Imelda May, that's her. And these people are guilting ordinary Irish people and calling Irish people racists and sexist and homophobes and stuff like this, because we are actually thinking for ourselves. We are not allowing ourselves to be propagandized. We are saying, no, you are not going to tell me how to think. You're not going to be telling me what opinions to have. I'm going to think for myself. Thank you very much. But this is why you have these kind of puppets, the likes of Hosier and Imelda May and people like that, who parrot the exact same values as the ruling class, as the uber wealthy. And this is what's going on, folks. And it's kind of sad, but this is how this system reinforces itself. But it's not just at that level, it's also at regional level. Even a lot of these kind of heritage clubs and societies and sporting clubs and musical clubs and so on, and artistic clubs and societies down through the country, you'll notice that as time goes on, they're having to incorporate these diversity and equality aspects to their activities and their events and their PR, and they don't have a choice, because they will not get funded if they are not seen to be taking on, diversity and equality and parroting these exact same ultra progressive, these incredibly radical progressive values. So it's like this this stuff is getting normalized and brought into the center in a totally artificial fashion. Why? Because the ruling class have these values and they want to perpetuate those values onto everyone else. So this is how the system perpetuates. So essentially, globalism starts to dominate in this way, through money, through power, okay, and through a certain amount of intimidation. So what's the end result of this? Well, it diminishes and it weakens our own unique culture as Irish people. It weakens our heritage and undermines, our history. And you get these people trying to revise our history. You get the likes of Liam Hogan, who are trying to play down and diminish what happened to Irish people who were indentured servants, okay, who were essentially transported as slaves over to Barbados and Montserrat and places like that, and this is something that certain of these academics and historians will play down and almost pretend never happened, you know. And this is the kind of thing that goes on when people are separated from their heritage. And it's so important that we hold on to that we treasure and protect our own unique Irish culture, our heritage, our history, our identity, our traditions, our language, our landscape, our countryside, our flora and fauna, like I mentioned previously, all of these things. The Irish people as well, of course, we have to protect who we are and not allow these incredibly powerful actors to take away what we have here. So what can we do? Okay, just to finish up, this is the last slide here, so maybe you'll be glad to know because it's gone on for quite a long time, I know. But I think it is important information. So when we're speaking to people, whether we're talking to people in person, okay, or whether we are trying to connect to people through social media or whatever it be, or through YouTube or whatever, it's important that we try and connect with people's emotions, okay? This is very important. Messages can be conveyed much better through emotions than they can be in any other way. Just by presenting information like cold, hard facts doesn't cut it for a lot of people. They need something to be given to them in an emotional message. This is why music is so powerful. This is why movies with powerful images and music is so powerful, But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We have to be able to connect to people through their emotions. Otherwise, the message is simply not going to connect. Another way is to connect through hobbies. All right, if you have common hobbies, this is a way of connecting with people. You could be going hill walking. You might have shared interest in music. What else? I mean, there's so many ways. I mean, just think of a hobby. Think of, I don't know, perhaps playing guitar, perhaps even flower arranging, learning languages, you name it. I mean, there's all these different ways in which people can connect through hobbies, and then through that they might find they have common interests, and they might even start talking a little bit about society and politics, and they might even come up with some of these points I'm mentioning here. And in that way, it's a more natural way of broaching topics which perhaps wouldn't have seemed so appropriate otherwise. But when you have that shared connection through shared interest, then, I think you can build on that and talk about bigger issues. Now, it's important as well that we come across as likable, relatable, down to earth, normal people. And what's important is that we should share personal anecdotes, stories from our lives, personal experiences. This is really important. The more normal that we can show that we are, and I know we are normal people here, but sometimes people don't realize that, they don't realize, like, I mean, I'm not showing my face here, and that's because some of the things I'm saying here, I mean, they shouldn't be controversial, but there are very powerful people in Ireland and beyond who simply don't like ordinary people knowing the facts. They don't like ordinary people knowing the truth of what's going on, and they come after people like myself and similar people and other nationalists. And sadly, that's why people like myself tend to stay anonymous, But, that's just how it is at the moment. But be that as it is, we can still talk to people. We can still, people in our daily lives, people around us, work colleagues, etc. We can still, let people know about what's going on. Some of the points I've mentioned here, but do it in a normal, down-to-earth, natural way. Don't use inflammatory language. Use very normal language as best you can. Don't use nasty words. Don't start talking about, third world immigrants and kind of, scammers and this kind of thing, and bogus people. This kind of language. It's not very nice. I mean, and even if there's some truth to that, it's best not to frame it like that. Try and use language that's not going to trigger people, okay? Because you're talking about normal people here. They're not used to this language, which can be very inflammatory, can be very triggering to certain people. Okay, so discuss issues that affect ordinary people, discuss issues that affect ordinary people on the ground. And to be fair to Sinn Féin have done this very well, Now, you could argue that Sinn Féin have engaged in policies which are very destructive and damaging for ordinary Irish people. But at the same time, on a ground level, they've also done some very good work too. And this is where they have, I think, gained support and the trust of a lot of working class, ordinary Irish people, because they have done a lot of groundwork. And I think this is a lesson for everyone else. You want to discuss issues that affect ordinary people and try and help and sort out these normal everyday issues that affect ordinary people on the ground. And then you can talk about bigger issues beyond that. But most people they're thinking about what's around them, their immediate surroundings. They're not really thinking about the bigger picture. So you got to try and help them and sort out their immediate issues around them before you start looking at the bigger picture. We should, of course, respect our culture and heritage, which is really the overriding message of this presentation. But don't be jingoistic. Don't overdo. Don't get into sort of hardcore patriotism. I don't think that helps anyone. Don't be jingoistic. It's this sort of aggressive nationalism and aggressive patriotism is not helpful. And it turns people off. And the tricolour, of course, is a it's our national flag, and I'm very proud of it. But again, if you've the tricolour everywhere all the time, again, I'm not sure if that's always the best idea. So again, just use your head. That's all I'm saying. Use your head. Don't be overtly jingoistic. Don't be overtly nationalistic. Don't be overtly religious. Don't overplay Catholicism or Christianity. Everything's sort of in a sensible level. That's what I'm saying here, because you have to realize you're dealing with ordinary people. You have to come across to be relatable. You have to come across to be normal and not in any way extreme. And some of that stuff does come across to extreme to normal people, to ordinary people. Okay, use gateway public figures. Now, on my Telegram channel, I've been talking about Russell Crowe a lot. Okay, Russell Crowe is what I consider to be a gateway figure, a gateway celebrity, if you like. Someone who, I guess you could say, is on what's considered to be the left, I suppose, but he's an intelligent guy. He's an interesting guy. He's an open-minded guy, and that's the most important thing, But unlike a lot of his peers, he is open-minded and he uses quite a lot of critical thinking. I would encourage you to share Russell Brand's his YouTube videos, his Facebook posts. He's a guy who's switched on. Instagram as well. Wherever you find Russell Brand's messages, they're often interesting. They're often thought-provoking. They're often open-minded. So I think this is a good way of reaching people, using certain gateway people like the likes of Russell Brand. Using humor is huge. Okay, humor is a fantastic way of reaching ordinary people. I really think we're missing a trick here. Okay, humor. If you look, there's a guy there on YouTube, on Facebook. He's called Andrew Lawrence. He's just a UK comedian, and he puts up these clips on social media. He does it every few days, every week, whatever. And it's literally him there talking to the camera. Okay, sometimes he changes his image a little bit, and changes his accent, but essentially it's just him talking to the camera, imitating different people, different celebrities, different public figures, taking the piss out of them. And it's very good. It's very good. It's very effective. And this kind of thing, we simply don't have this in Ireland. We don't have anyone really kind of lampooning, parodying some of these NGO activists, some of these, journalists who are kind of undermining Irish people, some of these political figures who are abusing their power, and now implementing these incredibly authoritarian CV measures on us. These are people that we can take on. And I think humor is one of the best ways to do this. And across multiple platforms, you need to be on everything. You need to be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, as far as possible. Be on as much multiple platforms as possible. Short clips. Okay, we're talking up to 5 minutes. Better not to be much longer than that. The shorter the better, I would say, because people have short attention spans in this day and age. And you want to be sharing those clips across multiple platforms for maximum exposure. You want to lead people towards the water. Okay, lead people towards the water. Don't make them drink. Okay, if people are given the impression that they came to a certain conclusion themselves, they will be more likely to go along with it. All right, this is really important. So you want to give them these small little red pills, if you like. Okay, So you want to lead people towards the direction of truth and objective facts and common sense and rationality. But don't force them to go, Try and sort of subtly direct people in the right direction. Don't force them to drink the water. Hopefully they will drink the water themselves. But so this is the kind of way you want to do it. Gently nudge people in the right direction, but never force them to drink the water. And last of all, I would say you should support content creators, okay? And I am coming at this from a nationalist perspective, Irish nationalist perspective, but, I'm open to people from all sides. I watch people from the so-called left and so-called right, people from all different perspectives. So if you find someone who you think is doing a good service, who is providing useful information, who's taking their time to provide quality content that makes a difference, I'd encourage you to support those people. Share their content. If they've got something like, I was going to say PayPal, but PayPal is maybe not the best, but you know what I mean. If your way of supporting them financially, do that as well. Share their content on social media, share it with friends on WhatsApp, whatever. You want to get their word out there as much as possible, because, the information I've shared to you here now today, this is the kind of thing we really need to get out to ordinary people in this country, ordinary Irish people, and not just Irish people, everyone really. But the information maybe might resonate a bit more with Irish people, but it's open to everyone. I think this is useful information for whoever. I think it's something that I think all people could learn from. So that's more or less where I'll leave it. Finally, I want to thank all of the people that I've taken ideas from. Some of these ideas are not my own ideas. I've taken ideas from international YouTubers and bloggers and so on. A lot of them nationalists, not all of them nationalists. And again, quite a few Irish, but not all of them Irish. And I know quite a lot of the well-known Irish nationalist YouTubers, and some of the ideas in here are from them. I've mentioned Keith Woods a few times, for instance. But really, a lot of these different YouTubers have contributed towards these ideas that I've mentioned here. So this information is not just coming from me, really. It's coming from multiple people, both Irish and international. And again, not just coming from the so-called right, but in some cases coming from the so-called left as well. So consider this as just a resource of information, information that is there to try and help ordinary Irish, well, not just Irish, ordinary people, try and tell you what's going on, and hopefully, lead you towards information, lead you towards coming to your own conclusions, having your own opinions, rather than letting the people in power decide your information, decide your opinions for you. That's really important. Okay, and just to finish up, finally, just to let you know, I'm going to update this video with links. And at the end of the video, I'm going to have a series of links. I'm going to update those links over the next few days. Hopefully, in about a week's time, I'll have it fully updated with all the links that I've referred to in here. There's one I didn't mention, actually, was a guy called John McWhorter. He is a black guy, a black American guy. He talks about so-called anti-racism and about how damaging that is. And this is a black guy now, American guy, and he is telling us truthfully just how damaging anti-racism is, that it's actually more damaging than racism. So that kind of information is very powerful and very instructive, I think. And that's the kind of thing I'll be linking in the show notes, in the presentation notes. So you can take a look at that in your own time. I'd encourage you to please share this video far and wide. Okay, share it with friends, share it with family members. Okay, share it with people from all sides of the political spectrum. They don't have to be nationalists. They could be whatever. Okay, they could be anarchists, they could be libertarians, they could be leftists, they could be whatever. Okay, people who are open to, objective, I think, fair-minded, balanced information. People who like to use critical thinking, people who care about facts. This is what I'm doing here, and this is the kind of thing I want to get out to ordinary people. And so please share this information far and wide with people who you think could benefit from it. As well, work colleagues, family members, people on social media, etc. So thanks very much, folks. Appreciate you staying with me. I think I've gone on for about 45 minutes at this stage. I know it's a long presentation. Thanks for staying with us, and hopefully I'll be talking to you again in the future. Thank you.